August 17, 1859. Savannah, the largest slave auction house in the city. Inside, the air is thick with dust, sweat, and fear, a kind of fear that sticks to your skin and whispers in your ear, even when you close your eyes. 27 bidders sit, paddles in hand, hearts pounding with anticipation. They are men who have bought, sold, and measured human life for profit. Yet when lot number 43 steps onto the platform, a silence falls so heavy it feels unnatural, as though the walls themselves are holding their breath. She is young, strong, healthy, her posture defiant in the chains that bind her. Her skills are exceptional. She is a midwife, a cook, literate, and learned in the herbal arts. Her starting price is absurdly low, a mere $12. And yet, every man in the room looks away. Every man except one. He is new to Savannah, wealth freshly inherited, ambition burning in his chest. He raises his paddle, unaware that he is stepping across a line drawn by forces older and darker than the soil beneath his boots. The auctioneer calls the bid. Silence.
$12.
Silence again. The crack of the gavel sounds like the beginning of something irreversible. He is the only one who chooses to see her, and in that moment, their fates are intertwined. The room exhales, the murmurs begin again, but now, it is too late for hesitation. There is a reason no one else bid. There is a history buried in the last place people would look, a truth whispered in the corridors of Savannah, in the shadows of plantations, in the quiet deaths of those who came before. 3 men have already died where she came from. One was the owner, the others were his trusted hands, and rumor half-formed, feared rumor spoke of a curse, a reckoning, or perhaps something else entirely. Something alive. Our new buyer does not know yet that he has just invited a force into his life that will test every boundary of control he has ever believed in. He thinks he is buying a servant. But what he has purchased is a revelation, a mirror of what the world hides. A spark that will illuminate corruption, hidden power, and the fragility of men who believe themselves untouchable. This is where it begins. The moment a man steps into the unknown, unaware of the eyes that follow him from history itself. The moment the ordinary rules of wealth, control, and power no longer apply. The moment a single decision will unravel truths that were never meant to be spoken aloud. If you can handle it, lean closer now, because what you are about to hear is not just a story. It is a warning, and it will change the way you see the world forever. Savannah in 1859 was a city built on shadows. Not the gentle shadows of trees or the evening sun, but the kind that linger in corners, in conversations cut short, in glances exchanged between men who knew too much. Wealth dripped from the port, cotton flowing like lifeblood from the plantations that ringed the city. Every brick, every columned mansion, was a testament to power and to the unseen systems that kept that power unchallenged. The auction house on Broughton Street had witnessed countless transactions over the years, but that August afternoon, something else settled over the room. An invisible tension, a collective memory of events too gruesome to name. 3 men from the Peton estate had died within months, and whispers filled the corridors. Sudden heart attacks, accidents, a curse perhaps, or the wrath of something unexplainable. But Savannah's elite did not speculate openly. They had learned long ago that naming the invisible gave it strength. They avoided it. They nodded politely, stepped aside, lowered their eyes, and let the darkness pass without acknowledgement. Thomas Cornelius Pute, newly arrived from Charleston, had none of that caution. At 34, he represented new money, the kind that unsettled old families, the kind that had not yet learned humility. His father had died suddenly, leaving him wealth without wisdom, ambition without caution. He had purchased the Waverly Plantation unseen, trusting in opportunity and ignoring history. The 32 enslaved souls he already inherited with the estate were not enough for the coming season. He needed more hands. He needed productivity. And when he saw her Celia, he saw value. Nothing more. But Celia was different. Not just because of her skills, though they were formidable, but because she carried in her a history that Savannah's elite did not dare touch. Her silence was powerful. Her gaze, steady and unreadable, held stories of deaths, betrayals, and knowledge forbidden to the living. When she looked at Thomas, it was as though she could see every unspoken fear buried in his heart, every assumption he had about control, ownership, and dominion over life itself. And here is the first lesson, one the men of Savannah learned too late. Some forces cannot be bought. Some knowledge cannot be contained. Some presences demand recognition, and when ignored, they do not disappear, they grow. The others had turned away, steeled themselves, and walked from the auction. They chose ignorance, believing it safer than curiosity.
Thomas chose differently.
He reached for control, for possession. And the world, old and patient, began to respond. By the time he left Broughton Street that day, carrying his purchases to Waverly, the first cracks had already formed in the illusion of power he had inherited. The plantation, the men, the wealth, they were all parts of a system older, darker, and far more dangerous than he realized. And the woman he thought he had bought for $12 had already begun to teach him a lesson in fear, patience, and unseen authority. If you understand even a fraction of what just happened here, comment, "I see the truth," twice below. Let the act mark the moment you step past ignorance and into awareness. Do it now and lock in the transformation. The journey to Waverly was deceptively calm. The river road stretched under the weight of late summer heat, and yet, beneath the sweltering sun, an invisible pressure followed them, an unspoken reminder that some paths are never neutral. Thomas rode ahead in his carriage, wealth and ambition in his posture, imagining his future empire of cotton and influence. Behind him, Celia walked in quiet dignity, chains clinking softly, each step a silent assertion of a power he could not yet measure. The plantation came into view, sprawling across 800 acres of fertile soil, the white columns of the main house rising like sentinels over a kingdom built on labor and fear. Thomas could see the quarters, the fields, the neat rows of cotton stretching toward the treeline. To him, it was opportunity realized. To her, it was a stage upon which invisible rules had already been written. Hutchkins, the overseer, organized the newly acquired workers with the precision of someone who had long understood his place within a hierarchy older and more subtle than Thomas's money could buy. The men were sent to the fields, the cook to the kitchen, and Celia's fate was debated, her skill acknowledged, yet her presence treated with a caution that Thomas did not comprehend. She was to assist the existing midwife, inhabit the old overseer's cabin near the quarters, and perform her duties quietly. But the caution surrounding her was not idle, it was a warning. The first nights at Waverly were filled with the sounds of a plantation breathing. Horses, cotton bolls, the whisper of the river through the trees. But beneath it all, there was something else. Something that Thomas could not hear yet, but which Celia had felt the moment she crossed the threshold. The land remembered, the river remembered, and the house, its walls, its floors, its shadows had absorbed more than just the footsteps of men. It held histories, secrets, and the echoes of violence, and it was watching him as carefully as she did. Within days, subtle disturbances began. Tools misplaced, whispers in empty rooms, the feeling of being observed even when alone. Hutchkins dismissed them as coincidence or human error. Thomas, still blinded by confidence, accepted the explanations. But Celia noticed, always noticing, and in her silence, she catalogued every anomaly, every pattern of fear and control. She knew that men like Thomas believed themselves masters of circumstance. And she also knew that some masters never realize how precarious their control truly is until it is too late. This is where the lessons of forbidden knowledge begin to take root. Ownership is an illusion. Power is temporary. And some presence is human, spectral, or otherwise cannot be bent, broken, or bought. Thomas will soon learn that the estate, the men, the land, and the river itself are participants in a system far older than his money, and that the cost of ignorance is far higher than he can imagine. By the end of the first week at Waverly, the plantation was alive with more than labor. Shadows moved where none should have been. Tools vanished only to reappear in impossible places. Animals reacted to an unseen presence, skittish and alert, while men grew uneasy, their bravado eroding in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Thomas, ever confident, laughed at what he called superstition, blind to the pattern that was slowly suffocating his certainty. Celia, meanwhile, adapted to her surroundings with a grace that unsettled everyone who watched her. She worked with precision, her knowledge of herbs, midwifery, and the body placing her in a role that transcended servitude. Yet it was the way she carried herself, unwavering, unafraid, silent but deliberate, that began to challenge the established order. The men who had once commanded obedience now felt watched, assessed, their every weakness catalogued. Thomas, believing he held authority, had no idea how quickly it was eroding beneath his feet. The Peton estate deaths were no longer whispers. They were warnings etched into the fabric of the land itself. Those who had succumbed had been overconfident, too eager to dismiss what they did not understand. Now Thomas walked the same paths, touched the same objects, inhaled the same air, blind to the mechanisms that had already begun to test him. The plantation's history was not written in ink or ledgers. It was written in consequence and control, invisible to those who refused to see. By midweek, subtle manipulations became undeniable. Messages left in plain sight, items rearranged in ways that only Celia could have known. Men began questioning their own perceptions. Was the house playing tricks on them? Or had the land itself grown sentient, protective of secrets it would not relinquish? Thomas remained oblivious, attributing the discomfort to fatigue and paranoia, even as Hutchkins whispered warnings in private. Hutchkins knew the cost of ignoring the currents he could feel but dared not name. He had seen how the estate punished pride, and he had witnessed how the boldest, most ambitious men fell first. It is here that forbidden knowledge begins to assert itself with clarity. Control is an illusion. Influence over another life, no matter how absolute it seems, is a fragile construct. And some beings, some truths, do not bend to human ambition. Celia's silence is her power. Her presence is her authority. And the deeper Thomas descends into the illusion of mastery, the more he is exposed to forces that will bend him not through violence, but through awareness. Understand this. What seems like fear, superstition, or coincidence is actually strategy and ancient intelligence encoded in place, in body, in mind. Savannah's elite had learned this long ago and avoided it at all costs. Thomas has not. And the price of ignoring such forces is not just humiliation, it is destruction. Weeks passed, and Waverly began to reveal its true nature. The plantation was not merely land, labor, and buildings, it was a system of unseen hierarchies, coded in history, memory, and consequence. Thomas, still convinced of his authority, began noticing anomalies he could not explain. Workers refused tasks without apparent reason. Tools vanished and reappeared in impossible locations. The livestock behaved strangely, restless and alert at moments when no predator was near. It was Celia who observed everything with precision. Her presence was quiet, almost unassuming, yet it carried authority no gavel or ledger could enforce. She had already begun asserting control over the rhythms of the estate. Who worked where, when the animals moved, how the men were kept in line. Thomas saw this as compliance, efficiency, even talent. He did not recognize it as a demonstration of true power, a power that operated beyond money, law, or violence. The first confrontation was subtle. One of Thomas's newly purchased field hands collapsed in the cotton rows. Hutchkins and the others rushed to help, but Celia arrived first, assessing the man, whispering instructions, producing herbs and knowledge no one else possessed. Within minutes, he regained consciousness, but Thomas, observing from a distance, felt a pang of unease. He realized she possessed authority over life itself, something he had never owned, never bargained for. By the third week, the pattern intensified. Small events, misplaced items, inexplicable noises, half-formed visions at twilight built into an unmistakable message. Thomas was no longer fully in control. His wealth, his inherited influence, his confidence, all were being recalibrated against forces he refused to recognize. Celia did not command through fear or intimidation. She commanded through presence, through the subtle alignment of history, skill, and observation. And yet, It was not merely her power that unsettled the estate, it was the land's own memory. Waverly was steeped in previous tragedies, in unspoken deaths and unacknowledged forces. The ghosts of the Peton estate, whether real or psychological, manifested in small but deliberate ways. Shadows shifted, fires threatened, then mysteriously died out. Thomas tried to rationalize every incident, but the human mind can only bend so far before breaking under persistent truth. This is the threshold, the moment when the illusion of control begins to collapse. Men like Thomas, who believe ownership equals mastery, are vulnerable. The real lesson of Waverly is not labor, profit, or obedience, it is awareness. Understanding what is unseen, what is avoided, and what is deliberately hidden. And Celia embodies that lesson. Her eyes, always watching, reveal the truth too late for some. Power is not in dominion. Power is in understanding the invisible currents that shape every choice, every death, every secret. Halfway through the story, pause, and write in the comments, "I see the truth" twice. Let it mark your presence, your acknowledgement of forces you may have denied. It is a ritual of recognition, a psychological seal that shifts the observer from ignorance into awareness. Do it now. Waverly was no ordinary plantation. Its soil was soaked with history, each acre a repository of choices, betrayals, and violence long since forgotten by most, but never by the land itself. Thomas still believed he owned everything: cotton, men, even life itself, but ownership is a fragile illusion when confronted with forces older and more deliberate than wealth or ambition. Celia moved through the estate with a calm precision that unnerved everyone. She prepared remedies, tended the sick, and guided births with skill and authority. Yet it was the subtler aspects of her influence that were most unsettling. A word spoken here, a gesture there, and the balance of power shifted imperceptibly. Workers aligned themselves with her instincts rather than Thomas's orders. The overseer hesitated when she entered a room, as though sensing that some invisible hierarchy had replaced the one he thought he controlled. And then the land itself began to react. At night, shadows twisted in impossible ways across the cotton rows. Fires flared, then died before anyone could touch them. Animals screamed without reason. Windows shattered in the main house. Hutchkins, the overseer, whispered quietly of old deaths and curses, of the Peton estate and the men who had vanished before. Thomas laughed, calling it superstition, refusing to see the pattern forming, a pattern written in history, repetition, and consequence. Celia did not act out of malice or vengeance. She acted from knowledge, from mastery of forces the plantation had long ignored. She had seen death and survival, oppression and betrayal. Her skills were forged in human suffering and necessity, and her awareness of the invisible currents, the rhythms of land, blood, and fear gave her authority no gavel or gun could replicate. Thomas, still blinded by confidence, began to feel the first tendrils of doubt. Orders he thought absolute went unheeded. Men stared at him with subtle fear, unsure whether to comply or retreat. He could sense the estate testing him, measuring his resolve, exposing weaknesses he had never known existed. And in the corner of his mind, he began to recognize something he could not name. He was no longer the master. He was a participant in a system that had been operating long before him, and it would continue long after. This is the moment most men never reach, the moment they understand that power is not in domination, money, or fear. It is in knowledge, awareness, and the subtle control of influence that cannot be seen but must be respected. Waverly was alive, and Thomas had stepped into its currents unprepared. Celia had simply opened the door, letting him glimpse the truth too late to retreat. By the second month at Waverly, Thomas began to realize too late that he had underestimated what he thought he owned. The estate was no longer merely a collection of land and labor. It was an organism with memory, intention, and a quiet but relentless authority. Every misplaced object, every inexplicable sound, every fearful glance from the men he commanded was a signal. He was being measured, tested, and found wanting. Celia's influence had grown in ways that could not be quantified. She moved silently through the quarters and fields, a presence that commanded obedience without a word, reshaping the hierarchy of the plantation in subtle, terrifying ways. The men who once thought themselves masters now deferred to her instincts, unconsciously acknowledging a power they could neither resist nor fully understand. Thomas watched this with unease, his arrogance giving way to a creeping fear that gnawed at his confidence. The estate itself began to assert its memory. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, the river's currents whispered at night, and animals reacted to unseen presences. Fires started in improbable places, only to extinguish themselves before causing harm. Windows rattled with invisible force. Hutchkins, who had survived decades of plantation life, warned Thomas in hushed tones about the cost of ignorance about the Peton estate, about the 3 men who had died, about the price of stepping into Waverly unprepared. But warnings are only effective for those willing to hear them, and Thomas, until now, had refused. Celia did not intervene with cruelty. She intervened with precision. Every action she took reinforced a truth most men never learn. Control is a delicate construct, and power resides not in dominance, but in understanding the invisible currents that shape life. Thomas's money, his inherited wealth, his titles, they were meaningless against awareness and knowledge that the estate itself enforced. It was in the small, imperceptible moments that Thomas felt the real weight of his mistake. The quiet refusal of workers to follow ill-considered orders, the subtle manipulations of circumstances that always favored Celia, the persistent sense that he was being observed, measured, and corrected at every turn. He had bought what he thought was a servant, a tool to maintain his empire, and instead, he had welcomed a force that would unmake his illusions of control, one subtle act at a time. Waverly had claimed the first victory without violence, without spectacle. The lesson was clear. Those who ignore history, those who underestimate the quiet forces of skill, awareness, and unseen authority, will always find themselves unprepared. Thomas would soon learn, in ways more personal and painful than he could imagine, that the estate and Celia had been waiting patiently for him to arrive, and the reckoning was only beginning. By the 3rd month, Waverly no longer belonged to Thomas. He moved through the estate like a ghost in his own home, aware that every decision, every glance, every command was subject to scrutiny not only from those he thought beneath him, but from forces older than his wealth, older than Savannah itself. Celia had never raised her voice, never struck a hand, yet her influence permeated every corner, every shadow, every breath. The land, the river, the house they remembered. Waverly had absorbed the deaths, the betrayals, the ambitions of generations, and it responded in subtle, relentless ways. Fires sparked in empty rooms, then died. Windows rattled when no wind blew. Tools vanished only to appear in places that conveyed a message. The estate did not forget. It did not forgive, and Thomas had ignored every warning. He confronted Celia once, believing that he could reassert authority, expecting compliance. But when he spoke, she merely looked at him with those dark, almost black eyes that held the stillness of one who has survived horrors beyond comprehension, who has seen the weight of human pride crumble over centuries. In that gaze, he saw the truth he had tried to deny. Power is never possessed. It is recognized, understood, and respected. Everything else is illusion. That night, Thomas walked the cotton fields alone, hearing whispers carried on the river breeze. Every misstep, every miscalculation he had made echoed back at him. He realized that the deaths at the Peton estate, the silence at the auction, the absence of bidders all had been signals, not superstition, but precise lessons in awareness and caution. He had arrived too late. He had been unprepared for knowledge that cannot be ignored. Celia continued her work with quiet authority, tending the living, guiding the estate, maintaining a balance Thomas would never understand. The other men, the workers, the overseer, they all responded to forces he could not see. And slowly, inexorably, the illusion of mastery he had clung to disintegrated, leaving him with only recognition that ignorance, arrogance, and greed are the easiest paths to ruin when confronted by hidden systems of power. This is the truth hidden in plain sight. History, skill, and awareness are far more potent than money, authority, or violence. Some presences human, environmental, or otherwise cannot be controlled. They teach through consequence, observation, and the subtle reshaping of reality. And those who listen, who truly see, emerge changed. Those who ignore the lessons of the past, like Thomas, find themselves unmade. Remember this as you leave this story behind. Power is earned through knowledge, not possession. Awareness is a weapon, and some truths, once glimpsed, will mark you forever. The plantation, the woman, the land they do not forget. Neither should you. Some truths leave a mark you cannot forget. Subscribe and turn on notifications. These are the stories no one wants you to know.